Yeah, I
Sorry,
think
Gordon.
I was going to say see, there's different levels of users. There's the more technical users who are like us on whatever platform, who, excuse me, who want to get inside and who want to get involved in understanding the different file structure and how things work. They want to poke about a bit and understand how things work. They may be restricted to some degree, but they at least want to go onto a sort of administrator style level on their system. And then there's the vast majority of the normal peoples, the normals, who don't care. And all the basics, all the superficial things that are all the same on all the operating systems. Every operating system has windows with a title border, and you right click and you can grab and move the windows, and you've got a close button, and you can right click and you've got menus, and you've got an applications menu of some sort, and you've got icons to double click in some way on the screen. You can right click and create a new file, and right click and open. All these sort of superficial things are the same on all modern operating systems. I don't think you're going to get anything. I mean, you talk about GNOME, KDE, XFCE, LXDE, whatever, OpenBox, whatever. They all have these things in common with every version of Windows and every version of OS X. It's the same. It's basically the same on a user level. They're all perfectly capable of doing what regular users normally want to do. And as you said, a lot of stuff now comes down to web and interconnecting with smartphones and getting notifications, updating your calendar on like Google Calendar, and it sends a notification to your phone, that type of thing. A lot of these services are basically OS irrelevant. And I think Linux now, for a lot of people, is equal now. I mean, I think for years you could argue that it might look a bit ugly, or there's no decent application for doing X, Y, and Z. But that's pretty much been taken care of now. So there's less to complain about when you say, "Oh, Linux isn't good enough to do this job or that job." But really, it is. It might be using different applications, but it's certainly good enough. And there's a few places where it's still lacking. We've got to be honest about that. And there's also places where it's stripped away in advance of what Apple and Windows can do. But for most users, it doesn't really matter. You can sit them down in front of any machine, and they should have all the same pointy, clicky interface that they can work with.
And I mean, rightfully so. We'll forget that, my car I used to get from A to B, and if somebody comes along and says, "Oh, if you replace engine part X with engine part Y, you can get better performance," I personally wouldn't have any interest in that whatsoever. For me, the car is a tool which gets me to work and takes the family out, but that's it. And I think often people forget, certainly those that are tech interested, forget that the vast majority of people, like you say, Gordon, that aren't technically minded or have any interest to be, and like I say, they use it like a toaster, like a utility, and they expect it to work. And maybe that's another.
Years ago, I used to work in Comet. I mean, I left there in the mid-90s, but I used to work in Comet, and one of the things I was told at the time was sell features. Sell benefits, don't sell features. It doesn't matter if you're selling a television. It doesn't matter about the technical refresh rate, and the customers don't care about that. They care about what they can do with the device. It's got fast text, this shows the age. It's got Nikon stereo, and it's got picture-in-picture. That's what they care about. That's the features, what they can do with it. They don't care about the technical specifications, and I think computers are the same as well. When you've got technically minded people who are obsessed with stats. Oh, my CPU is 2.6 gigahertz. Oh, mine's is only 2.4. Oh, I've got a dual core. I've got a quad core. So who cares?
I think, going back through history, and I've got quite a long computer past when I first got my first machine. But I think originally when the first computers came out, certainly with the ZX81, where you could buy it in kit form, I think for a long time the computing was seen as a hobby that you had to be tech interested, as it were, in order to have one. In the old days when people had these things called computers in the home and nobody would realise that they needed one, there was no talk about Microsoft or Windows or having word processors, anything like that. And I think for the vast majority of users, if you had a computer in the home, it was because you were tech interested. And I think the computing for a long time went through a period where it was a hobby, it was a passion, and the people that had them, certainly that started to go around the time of the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST, I think, where they made it relate to the home user more. But I think up until that point, there was a lot of, if you had a computer in the home, 9 times out of 10, the person who had it would be tech interested and maybe looking at a little bit of coding and all sorts of things like that. And it was only more recent times. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that they weren't really designed to be user friendly for regular users anyway. So that would be why. I mean, as it's evolved. That's one thing you have to give Apple credit for, is they really made it easy to use for regular users. Okay, they clamped down on a lot of options to do that, but they did do that. And others have learned from that, and they've made their systems easy to use in their own ways. And that is a regular thing. So that's just how computers have evolved.
Sorry, Roy, we're cutting you out of this now.
Just a couple of points I wanted to make. I mean, I didn't make any notes, and I don't actually use any notes while we record the show, but a couple of the mental notes that I took is, the first thing is about the phones and how they advertise. I think the way they advertise the phones is pretty much the same as Gordon explained about TVs now. If you look at the adverts, and occasionally I see some TV, and I don't really watch TV normally, but sometimes I do watch some adverts in different places. The way they advertise it is things like Twitter and Facebook. And they try to tell you can use the phone to talk to your friends. So, of course, they don't tell you about how many pixels you've got in the camera. They don't tell you about the processor inside of that. They barely even tell you about the operating system, but they try to boast some benefit, like speaking to your friends and stay in touch, and be in touch with work on the go, things like that, and all kinds of certain phrases that kind of appeal to people's minds in all sorts of ways. And that PR people who just check how many seconds they have and how many buzzwords and things they can put to instill some pictures in people's minds, how they can use the time. But in any case, the fact is with phones, like with computers, we in the past it was necessary to have some technical skills, and the target audience, the person who would buy a computer, would usually be a bit of a technical person. So if you were to sell a person a computer that only has one button to switch things on, or to do the mousing around with one button, the person might feel a little bit inferior to a person who's got more things, his or her disposal while working on a computer, especially if you work on things like AutoCAD or word processing as a professional secretary, things like that, which back in the days was probably a more common use than just going to Facebook and clicking on people's faces and open galleries and browsing. But the second thing I want to say about Apple, I don't exactly agree that they opened the market to the extent they could. I think Tim was trying to make the point that Apple is responsible for changing people's perception about computers and choice. But the fact is, what Apple is doing, it still sells the same impression as Microsoft, that you buy a computer with the operating system as part of it. So a lot of people think of their choices of operating system not as operating system, but they think about it as computers being the PC and the Mac. They don't think of them as operating system, because if it was an operating system, you'd be able to buy a Hackintosh, just put some OS 10 on it, and say, well, look, I've got a Mac, but it used to be a Windows PC. And people say, oh, so wait, there is a separation here. There is an unbundling between operating system and computer. Which is the case, by the way, because they make both computers in the same factories in places like Foxconn. They don't actually make them in different places. They don't use different hard drives. They use pretty much the same components, but the way they package these things, they try to get across the message. This computer is sold as a package to you, and you choose your lifestyle by choosing a computer, but you never get to choose an operating system. Somebody else decides for you. And this is where we do need things like BSD. And back in the days, BSD and Linux, and we used to have different versions of DOS. Even when I was a child, we had different people using different versions of DOS, for example, and being able to run different games. And sometimes you'd